Welcome to the FanDuel Audible. I'm Jason Gilbo, JGilbo11. With me is Spencer Limbeck at Spencer_JL. Taking a look at quarterbacks that you like here for cash games, GPPs, and value. I know you and I were talking before. We're both on the same page this week. And, jumping into cash, kind of hard to go wrong with these guys.
Yeah, first up you got Russell Wilson, probably the highest floor out of anyone on this slate for quarterbacks, at least in my opinion. And you really look this season, looking into your season-long leagues, looking into your daily leagues, it's all kind of the same narrative where he's going to have a larger role within this offense. And you have to consider that's pretty good, given that he's been awesome over the past 2 years anyway, putting up some high-quality fantasy points. You get the rushing yardage there. You get the outside chance of a rushing touchdown, especially considering Thomas Rawls. They kind of want to baby him the first few weeks in the season, had an ankle injury last year. They're not going to rush him back into a full workload right away. So Christine Michael going to get some more carries there. But I think Russell Wilson will pick up some of that slack as well. And really a great matchup week one. Obviously the Seahawks all around, all facets of their offense and defense play a lot better at home. And this is kind of a cake matchup against Miami. One of the worst all-around defenses of last season. And as I mentioned in the article, they didn't do a whole lot to upgrade the positions. I mean, they got a few rookies in there, but I don't see that making a huge impact week one. So, firing up Wilson for cash games, feeling confident about that, and then going for value elsewhere. There are a few cheap running backs on the slate. I think that's a pretty good strategy.
Yeah, I'm definitely in agreement. As far as the floor for Russell Wilson, it really doesn't get much better. And obviously the matchup at home and that workload, career high in attempts last year, and he set a career high in completion percentage. So it doesn't matter with this guy. He's just super efficient. Next one here, you're talking about Andrew Luck. Obviously was not healthy last year, but a home matchup against the Lions. This game is kind of the one outside of Oakland and New Orleans. This is the one that the shootout's going to happen in.
Right, and it's just that both of these secondaries are really pretty bad. You look at the Colts last season, they were bottom 10. I expect that to continue. And then their best cornerback, Vontae Davis, he was really the only one holding that secondary together. He's expected to miss the first month of the season. So, you do the math there. You have a bad secondary that got even worse with the loss of him. That's talking about Matthew Stafford's point, but it really does kind of feed into Andrew Luck as well, because if you have a bad defense that gives up points on your team, you're likely going to have to respond. You're going to have to push the tempo, really pick up the pace and get into the end zone yourself. So I like targeting quarterbacks that have a bad defense as well as a good matchup, and that's exactly what Andrew Luck is looking at here. The offensive line for the Colts isn't very good in the run blocking category, so I don't really expect them to establish much on the ground. As I said in the article, I think swing passes, short dumps to the wide receivers, the running backs, tight ends, that's going to be kind of their pseudo running game in this, and all of it just leads back to more fantasy points for Andrew Luck. And this is really the launching point for him, where he can get back to his monster year of 2014 and really put up those numbers that we saw then.
Yeah, I'm definitely in agreement. One thing also, you do have some stacking options to kind of pair with him as well, and they're not too expensive. You got a Dante Moncrief who's fairly cheap, T.Y. Hilton, so you can definitely go that route. And then obviously kind of transitioning into your GPP quarterbacks in that same game, you talk about Matthew Stafford, and you're also saving some cash, about $1,500 as well.
Yeah, as I just mentioned, that Colts secondary, not too good, and they got worse with the loss of Vontae Davis. So I really like Matthew Stafford, and you talk about his two pairing options, Golden Tate, Marvin Jones. They're pretty cheap as well, especially Jones. I think he's a great wide receiver 3, even if you're not playing Stafford. But all around, two bad secondaries, chance of a shootout here. I like both quarterbacks, really, so. Neither team has much of a rushing threat, so it's going to be all on these guys, Stafford and Luck, to keep pace with one another.
Yeah, definitely agree. I mean, you look at Stafford, definitely going to be airing it out. I mean, as you mentioned, I mean, you look at this Lions offense; they're just kind of built to throw the ball. And even with the loss of Calvin Johnson retiring, it just you look at this team and they're still expected for a big week one. Eli Manning, you talk about next here, which I like. I mean, I feel like I've heard a lot of kind of talk about Eli, and they go, "Oh, he didn't do well in the two games against Dallas last year," but we've seen these games kind of turn into those 31-28 type games, and I like his price, and I like the possible option going with him and OBJ.
Right, and I think it's going to be underrated just because of that point that you said. Plus, I mean, it's Eli Manning. If you remember 3 or so years ago, he was notorious for having those memes going around where he looked confused and didn't know what he was doing, and he threw a bunch of interceptions, and everyone just kind of pegged him as that turnover-prone quarterback. When really over the past 3 seasons under Ben McAdoo, his offensive coordinator, now head coach, he's improved each 3 seasons. He's been a top 10 quarterback. So I expect him to make more progress this season. And obviously, as Odell Beckham out there, really helps his chances of putting up a high fantasy total. And then, according to Pro Football Focus, uh, the Dallas Cowboys have one of the worst graded secondaries. If you look at their starters across the board, their corners and their safeties, and the stat comes from Pro Football Focus as well. They allowed 14 touchdowns and 0 interceptions among their starting secondary this season. So that's quite telling of their efficiency, and I think Eli could really expose that. And he's kind of a sneaky pick this week.
Yeah, I'm certainly in agreement. I like the chances there. And then obviously the value quarterback, no surprise here because he's obviously been one of the talking points of week one already, Dak Prescott. Bare min. I mean, how much exposure do you think you'll get to him?
It's gonna be 85 plus, I believe. I mean, I'm just gonna have some exposure to him, especially on a. It's kind of hard to shy away from him. FanDuel, it's a little more just kind of seeing what works in your lineup because, as I mentioned a little earlier, there are some value running backs you can go with and then pay up at quarterback. But I think overall, my cash game strategy is to go with Dak Prescott. I mean, you just look at the skill set that he has. He can run, he can throw. He has a great matchup against the Giants, who are one of the worst in the league against the pass last season. And granted, yeah, he did look good in preseason. Regular season might be a little bit different of a story. But consider that he's protected by one of the best offensive lines in the league. I think that really helps his cause. He can kind of slow things down. Doesn't have to worry about getting so much pressure on him as a lot of young rookie quarterbacks have coming into a bad situation, usually with a bad offensive line. I mean, he kind of has the luxury there. And on top of that, I'm a little bit partial to Dak Prescott because he's helped me out over the past few seasons in college football daily fantasy. Obviously, a little bit mad that I can't do that this season with college DFS, but I'm looking for Dak Prescott to reward my faith once again, this time in professional football.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I mean, I like him quite a bit. Going to have a ton of exposure, and obviously the matchup against the Giants. I mean, it all kind of sets up for a decent week from him. At minimum, a decent week. I mean, especially at that price, he doesn't have to do much to really pay it off, and he kind of helps you in terms of roster construction. Really get whoever you want.
Right, and a couple other quarterbacks I just want to throw out real quick. Tyrod Taylor, obviously you love the rushing, the passing combination there. Creates a high floor, high ceiling situation. He's at Baltimore this week. While you don't love him on the road necessarily, typically performs better at home. This still is a pretty good matchup. I think Baltimore has a bottom 10 secondary in the league right now, and their defense is just kind of flux as we saw last season. So I think he can perform pretty well. I like him as a GPP play. Speaking to that same tune, Kirk Cousins could get into a little bit of a shootout there with Ben Roethlisberger and the Steelers. Another guy, you look at his home road splits. He was awesome at home last season, a disaster on the road. Obviously, this game is the early Monday night game at home against the Pittsburgh secondary that wasn't very good last season. I want to say they're bottom 10 as well, and they are in terms of Pro Football Focus's player grade rankings. So, I mean, you have to really like that matchup, and I think that's someone that a lot of people are overlooking just because, I mean, you have Prescott so cheap. You have the high-end guys, Russell, Wilson, Andrew Luck, Aaron Rodgers really stealing the show. So I think Kirk Cousins could be a really sneaky play against a bad secondary in what could be a shootout.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Those are awesome pivots right there. I know you and I both talked about Tyrod Taylor before the show. Big fan of his and what he can do in terms of upside. So that's going to wrap things up with the FanDuel Audible. But sure, check out dailyfantasycafe.com for all our great tools and content.